It's been too long. It's good to see you all and encourage you as well. I thought this evening we'd look at Colossians 4, and Colossians 4 verses 2 to 6. And the reason why I want to share from this passage is that I know that you are a fellowship that are committed to outreach and evangelism, and it's a really helpful passage about how the Lord opens doors, how he those opportunities, how we can redeem the time, and how we can do that. So I'm going to speak for shorter than I normally would do, probably only about 20 minutes. But following that, I thought it'd be really good to ask a few questions and also share a few experiences. So in one sense, it's a short preach, and then it's a Bible study together as we can share experiences, good and bad, and also how we reach other people with the gospel and pray into those things as well. So Colossians chapter 4 and verses 2 to 6. Continue earnestly in prayer, being vigilant in it with thanksgiving. Meanwhile, praying also for us, that God would open to us a door for the word, to speak the mystery of Christ, for which I am also in chains, that I might make it manifest as I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom toward those who are outside, redeeming the time. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. So the obvious question is, how can we be vigilant in earnest prayer with thanksgiving in our outreach? How does this work in practice? Well, I was involved in outreach with the Open Air Mission for over 10 years, not every week, but most weeks or every fortnight. And I used to go out and do some open air preaching, and often I think that prayer would be insufficient. It could be due to being involved in lots of ministry activities that I was rushed, or I'd suddenly look at the clock and I'd realize that I've got 40 to form a square and be part of the team as well. And I'd realized it was rushed, and in the car I'd be praying. For the last few years, I've made a few changes which have really helped within that. One of those things has been keeping an outreach diary, a page-a-day diary, so that when I have conversations, those conversations get recorded together with the names of people so that I can pray for them again. I also have an Excel spreadsheet, which might sound incredibly organized, but I found it's paid real dividends. It's helped me to organize and pray for those people specifically. Also, whilst out in the streets over the course of 2 hours, you might speak up to possibly 10 people. And those 10 conversations can get formed into 1 or 2 or 3 conversations. You forgot what you said to whom and how. And I immediately log into my phone just using Microsoft Word or Samsung Notes, and it helps me log those conversations. When it gets recorded, I pray for those people. It helps me remember my last conversation. It means there's consistency, and I can pray into the work. I found it's really transformed the ministry in that respect. In this passage, though, Paul asked for prayer. And if Paul was an apostle, if he was a master evangelist, how much more we need to ask for people to pray to support our outreach as well. Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ, and we should do that ourselves. I know some people who've been involved in outreach more years than I've been alive, and they'd still like to be out doing outreach, but they can't because of COVID or because of age or health. But if we call them regularly and involve them in their prayer, they're actively involved in the work as well with us, and they can pray intelligently if we keep a record of who we're praying for, although we keep that confidential within ourselves. And here we see that the mystery of Christ is revealed in the gospel. In other words, the hidden truths of the Old Testament are revealed in the purpose of the work of the Lord and in the New Testament as well. So prayer support is vital in the work. Colossians, like 3 other epistles, were written while Paul was in prison. And you could even say that Paul had an active prison ministry. We know from Acts 16:25 that he was singing hymns and praising the Lord and praying at midnight. But if we look carefully, there was more that he did within his prison ministry. Why is prison ministry relevant to us in our situation? Well, Paul was in prison. We're in lockdown. We're not in house arrest, as it were, but there are some similarities And I think we can identify those and take those further and use them helpfully in our ministry. So we've already identified that he's prayed to the Lord whilst in prison, and he's praised God as we can do. Paul also knew that God was sovereign, and his highest priority was not getting out of prison. I'm sure he'd have wanted to, and we would love to get out of lockdown and be able to have a normal life and to continue conversations and to be able to engage with people and be outdoors more. His highest priority was the gospel. How do we know that? Well, if we look at the content of his letters, he's concerned with the integrity of his ministry and the furtherance of the gospel. He's not urgently seeking to get out of prison. Well, he doesn't mention that anyway, but he recognizes that God has a purpose for him whilst he's there. And the same is true of us. We might feel uncomfortable and restless. We want to get out, but at the same time, God opened doors of ministry, even though we're shut indoors within our homes. So 3 things, firstly, that Paul did. Firstly, he wrote 4 letters whilst in prison, and that had an incalculable effect. Think of it. Those letters that he wrote whilst in prison have influenced people at the time, people over hundreds of years, and then inform us with God's truth, which is life-changing today. Secondly, he spoke to those in prison about the Lord, and that worked out for good. How do we know that? Let's go to Philippians 1 and verse 12 to 14. It's amazing how it's turned around so positively what would seem such like a bleak situation. I know many evangelists saying, I can't wait to get out there. I'm itching to get out and do some outreach. But Philippians 1, 12 to 14 says this: "But I want you to know, brethren, that the things which happened to me have actually turned out for the furtherance of the gospel, so that it has become evident to the whole palace guards and to all the rest that my chains are in Christ. And most of the brethren in the Lord, having become confident by my chains, are much more bold to speak the word without fear." So amazingly, it's for the furtherance of the gospel. The witness is strengthened. He's encouraged others, and he recognized God's sovereign purposes. The third thing that he did was he studied and he read whilst in prison. And we get that from 2 Timothy 4, verse 13. Just going to go there briefly. 2 Timothy 4, verse 13. Interestingly, this is just like William Tyndale. He had made a similar request to what Paul made to Timothy, because here Paul asked Timothy for a few items. He says, "Bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas when you come, and the books, especially the parchments." Just like William Tyndale, he asked for his coat, a cap to keep his head warm, I believe, and also the books. And that's like us. We might be hemmed indoors, but if you're anything like me, you've probably got a backlog of books, which I call my book log, which sort of stacks up here and there in different places. It seems to grow all the time. It's a great time and place to read some of those books and to use that time effectively and redeem the time as well. So I've mentioned what Paul did. How can we take a leaf from Paul's letters, and how can we take that stage further and apply that as well whilst in lockdown? Well, Paul wrote letters, and we can write letters as well. We can write letters to friends or loved ones, those we've shared the gospel with. We can also write more formally. We can write to MPs or the council or those with influence. I always remember one lecture I went to in Bible college, and I sort of said half-heartedly, well, you can write to the Queen, but you'll never get a response back. And my friend says to me, I did get a response. And that made me think that letters have value. They have that personal touch. Something of the character of a person is transmitted through the letter. And also people can read a letter again and again. So letters really have value, and it's a good thing to do. Maybe you haven't spoken to someone for a while. A letter's a good way to write things, because you can really think about how you want to word something, and it can be tremendously useful for the Lord and for ministry. We've also got the benefit of the internet, both good and bad, but we can write articles, set up a blog, and share sermons and podcasts. Over the last few months, I haven't been able to be outdoors on the streets, but I have been able to write lots of website articles, and that's been a great blessing to reach many people. So that's been a really useful thing to do. Again, Paul recognized that God was sovereign in the place that he was at. There's so many things that we can do now that we couldn't have done just a few decades ago. I found that many more people are appreciative of phone calls, particularly some of my contacts that I meet on the streets. They're more welcoming of phone calls and they ask more questions. Text or Zoom, I try and find out what method of communication they like best and go for that. Some people like a phone call, some people like an email, whatever it is, I try and link in with that helpfully. And also a recent thing, but very simple, very effective, Bible boxes. Just a clear storage box that you use for moving house with. Just put some Bibles in there, good material. From 10 of those, you can get books often for £1 by Roger Carswell and the like. Excellent resources. I buy them in bulk. Get ESV Bibles for £1.50 a pop as well. Really useful and great for sharing the gospel. And thirdly, like Paul, we can use this time to study. If we've got that backlog of books, we can read them. There's so many good resources on the internet. Though obviously we have to be discerning, but it's a good time to use that while we can. I've recently signed up for Answers TV. I went to the Answers in Genesis conference on Saturday by Zoom, and it was 8 hours long. So I was saying to John to get myself through that. Although I enjoyed it, I had my lunch, did some exercise, played with some stickle brick, went out for a walk in the middle, and it was a blessing. But Answers TV has got stacks of resources. It's £35 a month, stuff for all the family, and really useful for outreach and asking loads of good questions and the like as well. So another character who was in prison for a while was John Bunyan. And whilst he was in prison, he wrote Pilgrim's Progress. And again, we think to ourselves, was he desperate to get out? And what did he do while he was in prison? I'm going to read a short paragraph that says it all, really. When John Bunyan was arrested for preaching illegally and put into prison, he was told that he'd be released if he promised to stop preaching. "If I'm out of prison today," he replied, "I will preach the gospel again tomorrow by the help of God." So again, very much like the Apostle Paul, he's got his focus. He realizes there's restrictions, but there's many things he can do. Another great avenue I found whilst on the streets before lockdown was many people are open to come to church currently. I've met a few people on the streets, and I've connected them either with Zoom meetings or brought them along to a church as well. There's loads of people who I call are on the periphery. They're either believers but aren't in fellowship, or people that are very close and just haven't been to church for a long time. Or some people, they are regular churchgoers, but their church has somehow just stopped. They've just sort of closed up the shop for the time being. And those are really good people to invite. Not that we're trying to sort of poach from other churches, but if there's no ministry at their local church, it's great to bring them into where the gospel is being preached and to draw them in as well. On Zoom, there's obviously benefits and drawbacks. Some of the benefits are people don't have to leave the house, and they don't have to master up courage. I found that whilst on the streets, if I give people a card to invite them, they'll be grateful, they might do that. If I call somebody to meet them there, or I'm willing to go with them, it's much more likely they'll come. For a lot of people, it's a whole new thing stepping foot in a new church or a new place, so they appreciate somehow bridging the gap to make it easier for them. Verse 5 tells us we're to walk in wisdom, and there's a balance between taking opportunities and forcing them. Often at work, there's we want to share the gospel. It's good that our witness matches what we say as well. And people will read the book of our lives, and it's important that we have a credible witness. I love this expression, redeeming the time. I'd only thought of it in one sense. I normally thought of it in a sense of using your time wisely. In other words, What can we do that is profitable for God's kingdom and his glory? But in terms of redemption, it's got that idea of buying back. And some helpful commentaries mention it's the whole idea of buying up opportunities when there's a chance to share the gospel in the context of this passage. So in other words, when we pray for those opportunities and the Lord brings them, it's a good time to really take those opportunities and follow through with them to really redeem the time and use it helpfully. In terms of how we share the gospel, I remember the late Doug Harris. He used to be the director of Reach Out Trust, and also another apologetics ministry that have been really helpful in the way that they share the gospel. They used an example of a TV character. Now, don't know if you remember Columbo, the detective from the States. I never used to watch Columbo, but there's two apologists who recommended watching Columbo. Why is that? Well, most police officers, they shoot from the hip. They're very assertive. They mean business. They're right onto things. Columbo, his style was different. He was unassuming. He never gets rattled that people try and pin things on him. He listens. He's a great listener. And he also asks questions. All those factors are great for our outreach. And to borrow a line from Columbo as well, just when they think they've got him into a corner, he says, "One more thing." And he often saves the best for last. He saves a point he wants to keep, and it often helps to solve the crime. It's like us in our outreach. Often we sort of get so far, there's a sort of a pause. We can use that one more thing and have something ready to keep the conversation going and to leave somebody with a vital point. You see, if we put people in the corner, they'll often take fights or they'll flight. But we can speak the truth in love. And in terms of our manner, not our words, be like Columbo in our approach. I've mentioned listening. Listening is such a vital part of our outreach. People love to be listened to for you to hear them. If we listen to someone for a few minutes, it gives us the chance for us to speak to them as well. Often we've got something that we want to say, we want to get off our chest and deliver, but if we listen to others, it's so helpful, often gives us that credible chance to share something. Again, like Columbo, asking good questions is so helpful. Why is that? It makes people think rather than letting them just spout what they think in the first place. If you ask a question, they have to provide a response rather than just say what they want to say. It's great both ways. It makes people have a conversation rather than a dialogue that isn't really a conversation. It's just, I think this, I think this. It makes it more engaging and you can often get further that way. Also, again, like Columbo, keeping composure can salvage many conversations, build friendships, and present opportunities. And finally, in verse 6, Paul was brilliant at knowing how we ought to answer each one and engaging with people as individuals. When we're sharing the gospel, we're not an army of clones. It's not one size fits all. It's not as if we're all eating McDonald's together. So knowing the basics of other beliefs will help you understand where they're coming from and their culture. And asking questions, first of all, will often uncover where they really come from. Now, I've got a couple of questions that I always use. I'm not saying that you should use these questions. If they help, brilliant. If not, that's fine. I love sharing with other people, other evangelists, how I share the gospel because it's often very similar but slightly different, and you can often pick up things from others. That's why I want to talk about it afterwards, which would be helpful. There's two questions that I always use for outreach. The first one is, do you have faith in God? And the reason for that is because it makes them think. If it's a short response, I follow up with another question, which is, do you have a certainty for the next life? That question, do you have certainty for the next life, will uncover either a works-based or a grace-based response. In other words, I think I'm going to heaven because I'm a good person. Works-based response. I think I'll be reincarnated. Works-based response. I know I'm going to heaven because of what the Lord's done for me. I believe in him. Grace-based response. But those two questions do you have faith in God, and do you have certainty for the next life, will open up so many conversations, and also following that will help you recognize where they're coming from and what they believe, and it'll save you hours. If we jump in straight there and we say, this is the gospel, the ABC, we don't know where they're coming from, we don't know how to present the gospel. It's really helpful to meet them as individuals and as people. In closing, I just want to share one example of one people group last year that I've been able to reach in a different way, and that's pagans. People that are overtly pagan. It's really interesting because you can use Romans 1:20 with the whole idea of the invisible attributes of God are clearly seen by the things that are made, that we don't have an excuse. We can see that the creation speaks of the creator. So how does this work in practice? Because pagans are a really interesting bunch, and last year I had some great conversations, and previously it wasn't always the case. So the conversation normally goes like this. I'm standing at the book table. I say to them, I've got 3 books and Bibles, do help yourself. Do you have faith in God? And they might say, I'm pagan. And by saying I'm pagan, that's either get out of jail free cards, or they might be incredibly fearful. Some of them, it's almost as if they're like a deer in front of the headlights. They hear that you're a Christian. They think that you might want to go on a witch hunt, or that you hate them, or whatever. So those things can quickly be just dispelled. So whenever I get that now, I say to them this: oh, it's really nice to meet you. I love animals. I love the outdoors. I love the mountains, the valleys, all the natural things we see around us. Is it possible that the things that you and I love could be created by an intelligent and wise God? And normally there's a pause for a few seconds, and they respond, when you put it like that, I suppose that is possible. And then very often a good conversation will follow. A bridge has been built in 2 minutes, and it is so helpful. So it's a great way to use scripture and apply it to draw people around that as well. And we can do the same for people from other groups and religions, but I thought that might be helpful. So that's what I wanted to say this evening.